it has a good result, we beg to oppose.
Thank you for your care. Now we call upon DP.
orphan characters, it's the romanticization of the orphan aspect of these characters, right? As if they're the only character trait, the only personality trait coming from these characters, right? We think in any world, that character is a character that only focuses on one aspect of their identity, right? Talking about, for example, don't only focus on the fact that you're a ninja, don't only focus on the fact that you're, for example, a particular thing. We think that this kind, the kind of characterization and romanticization that we're talking about in this debate is the ones where orphans are the only and the main struggles of this particular character, right? Probably talking about how they lack resources, probably talking about how they've never had love, and so on and so forth. You need to differentiate between the existence of a solid storytelling where the only character trait of the particular character is, for example, the orphan part of these people, right? That's why, for example, Harry Potter can still be successful, Naruto can still be successful, all these other things. That's because they have elder aspects for it. But we think that what the problem is that in current media, there are still very many stories that only capitalize on the orphan aspect of several characters, right? I'm going to be talking about two parts. So first of all, talking about how this is necessarily bad in terms of representation towards the orphans. Second of all, about how this is necessarily lazy storytelling and why this is bad in terms of representation as well, right? But first of all, several responses. OO tries to argue to you that most likely these orphans are facing, for example, discrimination because they're less successful, because there's no parents, because they're bibit, bebet, bobot, and so on. You need to recognize that in terms of orphans, to a certain extent, this is true. But this is not only because of the characterization of popular culture and so on and so forth. This is because the real life situations in which orphans are structurally disenfranchised, right? For example, first of all, legal liability, talking about how you cannot do certain actions if you do not have a guardian or legal parent. Second of all, talking about the lack of resources, because you do not have parents who actively work for you, who actively use their wages to invest in your growth. Third of all, talking about how it's a simple problem of ageism in society, right? If you're a child, people are less likely to respect you rather than if you're a healthy 20-year-old, right? This is the problems that are not solved by popular media, right? Or just a generally better narrative towards orphans is not going to help this, because these are problems that are deeply rooted to disenfranchise orphans in such a well-developed society, right? So therefore, to counter these problems, you need structural empowerment. You need voting. You need, for example, changes to the legal system, changes to laws and bills and so on and so forth. Or for example, you need to have a better welfare system that anyone can access regardless of whether they have parents or not. The conclusion is this: whether or not the orphans' lives get better on the end of the day do not rely on popular culture. But what relies on popular culture? It is the fact of how people are going to interact with it. The most important part of Elgar's speech, for example, is talking about how you're going to box orphans necessarily only into extremes. Either you're super optimistic to the point where even murder will not faze you, like Tanjiro Kamado from Kimetsu no Yaiba, or for example, you're going to be a super pessimistic bitch, talking about how you trust no one and you lack love all the time. We think that these are extremes that are existed in such a booming popularity of romanticization of orphans, right? And second of all, talking about parental figure harms, we think that the rebuttal coming from OO is not enough to counter this, right? Because when you're talking about parental figure harms, this is especially important to orphans because their learning value will not only come from the orphanage and general public, they will try to pick up social cues exactly from popular media. This is exploitative in itself, nature, right? Because not only talking about all these other things like sidekicks and so on and so forth, the growth of this child entirely depends on this parental figure that comes the hell out of nowhere, right? We think this is better in the current status quo, where, for example, at least you have familial ties with this guardian figure, or for example, you can rely on your teacher because, for example, they are legally required to teach you stuff, right? We think that this is different in terms of how a child is going to view, right? Because the moment they step out into the real world, they have choices as to what kind of person they support, what kind of person they're going to trust, right? We think that unreasonable trust in a parental figure is exactly what causes things like big age gap in relationships, right? Because you get the belief that adults will love you even if you don't have parents, right? They try to argue by exactly because they're lonely, they're less going to be trusting, but that's where the romanticization comes in, right? It gives you false hope, right? Your guard is let down because, for example, if Naruto never trusted this Jiraiya person in the first place, he would never get the benefit of a parental figure, right? It forces you to let your guard down and to not judge people as rationally for a while. But furthermore, what kind of victimizing is happening in the current status quo? We think that what happens, besides for pity, I'm going to extend Algat's point, is that there's a useless characterization of a need for excessive love, right? As if you don't have family, you're not going to be able to experience affection and love. This is not true, right? Because you have other social systems, for example, friendships or workplace or workmates or friends in debating and so on and so forth, right? Characterizations of orphans, the moment they don't have a family, suddenly they never experience anything of love, right? This is bad because in the current status quo, people are going to force boundaries on them and do good acts without them asking for it, right? This is bad because first of all, you want to be the saint figure. The fact that these parental figures or any kind of figure that help the orphan is suddenly seen as the best character, as the most altruistic character. This is going to encourage people into doing little acts, right? These are not things that are as structural as voting or, for example, things as simple as adopting these children, but these tiny acts that they never asked for example, talking about how you're going to do excessive skinship or trying to tell them the standards or inviting them for food at home and so on and so forth. So this is bad. Second of all, you're going to enforce one strict standard of love, as if only having parents is the only standard for you to do so. We understand that in the current in the current mainstream media, there might be some, but we think that this is different, right? Because in the essence, where if it's romanticization of orphan, then the only solvency to the problem of orphanage is the existence of parental figures. Their only struggle is centered on the lack of parents. But third of all, we think that this is bad because it's going to enforce the narrative that being in an orphanage, being an orphan is a shame, right? The things that the harms that OO talks about, the prerequisite is the romanticization of orphanhood, right? Because exactly, you're going to portray it as something that is so bad, as something that is so pitiful to the point where people have no choice but to see you as a weakness, to see you as a bad person, right? But lastly, we think that the best part about this is that it's lazy storytelling, right? Because romanticization means that everyone's doing it regardless of their capability and writing. It is seen as the ultimate weakness. It is seen as the ultimate liability, regardless of what you do. If you are an orphan, then by default, you are someone who lacks common manners and common sense and so on and so forth. We think that there are better struggles to be talked about in the current status quo. Things like queer love, disabilities, races. We don't think that the only struggle that you need to talk about in the current status quo is exactly orphanhood. And for all these reasons, we're very proud of OUNs.
Thank you, next yellow.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. notice that the team that will win this debate is a team that are able to prove why orphan, which is the most vulnerable actor in this debate, how are they going to be affected the moment you regret, or how are they going to be affected the moment you are instilling their identity as the main thing that makes some characters win or have a happy ending, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the way this media impact orphans and how they're going to feel the benefit out of that media is an approach that any team should try to explain in this debate, right? Because they're the most vulnerable actor. They're the one who do not have anything else other than the media. In a scenario where their life so sucks, the only thing that they can access is the media. Therefore, we should have to defend this actor, right? What we're trying to talk about in the opening opposition is that no media is perfect. Notice this, which means that, what does it mean? We think that it's realistic to assume that no media interpretations will be perfect. There will be misinterpretations. It will always be exist because life is very subjective and what does represent an orphan or what does represent a certain character to begin with. Sometimes people's background of life is going to be different, and that's just life, ladies and gentlemen. What does it mean, right? It means that there's no evil intention that comes from the writer. There's no evil intention that comes from the people who wrote this narrative to begin with. We said that the problems, we think that the problems by government side of the house is the fact that they don't want to highlight their identity of an orphan to begin with, but they want to, they still want to approach, or they still want to make orphan relatable with that narrative, like with that story, ladies and gentlemen. Notice that there's a huge gap on how the orphan, when they saw a character that are not different with other people that seem normal because they have parents, why does then they're still going to feel relatable to that character to begin with, ladies and gentlemen? We say that the moment they regret, they create a high requirement in order for you to create or adopt orphan as your character. There needs to be a very complex stories, or there needs to be a very complex characterizations. We said that it's unlikely to make sure that media is going to better represent in the future, right? Because better movie and better representations cannot exist or can get better under opposition, under government side of the house, because there's going to be so much requirement in order for them to bring that character to life. We say that they're only going to criticize, and that's bad. We say that we celebrate the fact that right now characters are being identified as orphan. We agree that it's not perfect, but at the very least, the representation is there, and that's what matters. In the future, we're still open for creating better representations or characterizations of what orphan is. But let's look at what's the context of media right now, right? Let's talk about the examples that are brought up on this debate, Naruto and Harry Potter, right? We say that right now, there is a very multi-layered explanations that come from 7 series of books or like 7 series of movies, ladies and gentlemen, that shows you a realistic life of why these characters actually living their life, right? Granted, it's not going to be super realistic because this is fiction, ladies and gentlemen, but at the very least they have an attempt to show how it's imperfect. What I'm talking about Naruto, for example. The writer shows you him losing and the process of him losing or like failing in chasing Akatsuki or chasing Sasuke, for example. Or in Harry Potter, it shows you the main scenes when there can only when Harry Potter can only trust to himself when there's no other people that can be relied upon, and he rely upon himself. It's a very complex characterization. That's life. Sometimes you need to rely on yourself, and sometimes you need to rely on other people, and that will exist under our side of the house because we give you characterizations of why that exists. We said that this hits more and hit close to home to orphan people because they see Harry Potter and Naruto as similar to them. The one who seems as an oddball because they are orphan, ladies and gentlemen. Exactly because you highlighted the fact, the identity that they are orphan to begin with. If they're gonna talk about, it's problematic because they're being hyperbole about a certain characteristic, like being too like optimistic and whatsoever. We say that mostly they're able to understand that this is movie because hyperbole is literally the characterizations of fiction movie, even if there's no push for a narrative orphan or like disabled, for example, still doesn't matter because that's how media life. So most likely they're still going to be able to differentiate what's reality and what's not, right? So it's not going to be as bad as they're going to say, because even if they're not, they have misrepresentations of how orphans should behave, like super optimistic or super depressed, there's still going to be interaction with people even if they don't have friends. You're still interacting with cashier, for example, when you want to buy grocery and stuff like that, which means that human interaction will exist under this orphan life, and they will be able to differentiate what type of communication of how you present yourself in society, ladies and gentlemen. They're not going to rely themselves on the media that much, although we agree that there's also a big impact that are given to these people, right? But lastly, talking about on how that there's unrealistic expectations of having mentor or having parental figure, right? We said that it's not true. It's first of all, I would like to clarify that this means that this is not the problem of romanticizing or highlighting the fact that these people are orphanage, but the fact that how the writing should look like, and we think that this is something that can change to begin with. We should, if we push for romanticizations, constant romanticization, so people could constantly criticize, right, to be better. We say that even right now, with that in mind, series that in Harry Potter, for example, they showcase series that are like Jiraiya, that which means that it's not as perfect as what oppositions are trying to impose, right? Lastly, I'm going to talk about why this is a push for a sense of belonging, right? Something that we pushed since the beginning of the debate, never been answered by opposition. This is the most important thing, because this is why media matters to these people, right? To the most vulnerable people, which is the orphan. It shows you on how you can experience happy ending, or you could be normal because you're orphans. It gives you a sense of belonging, showing that there are support system outside your family, for example, your friends. Just because you only have friends as your support system doesn't mean that you are oddball, doesn't mean that you are weird. We think that you can also access happiness even if you only have friends or people around you that are not your parents, for example. It also highlights the fact that you could not, even if when you're insecure, there will be moments when you feel happy again, because it shows you when people are, no, thank you, it's already 6:24. It shows you realistic examples of what orphanage would look like. It's not only the site where they are depressed, like what the reality is. We say that could be a form of escapism, and we're okay with that, because orphan life sucks all the time when they have to continuously be independent, and we agree to that. That's why this media matters, because it makes them remind them why positivity could exist under their side of the house, right? This could exclusively exist when you portray orphan as a big thing in the character development, as a big thing of why they become successful, because only then this orphan can relate to their background, to this character, ladies and gentlemen. Even if there's the same character that are not that push for the same value, it won't be relatable when they do not have the same background. We say that when people orphans rely so much on media, we have to represent them and be inclusive, proud to oppose.
Thank you to opening because from closing government, we call on the
Check. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. When I first saw this motion, I know this is a very bad motion because there's literally no urgency at all with this motion, right? So this is why we have to kick out opening from this debate, because basically what they're saying is unrealistic and unfactual. They're arguing that how much impact this will have to little kids, how much impact this will have to parents, how much impact this will have to that kid's friend, and how to stop bullying, basically. But then if that is the case, then we will see no bullying at all right now, because we have seen the romanticization since hundreds of years ago, but they are still bullying. Kids still don't care about this kind of movies, and they still treat their friends who are orphans badly. So what is the question of this debate? The question of this debate is on how to create an art that could manifest the problem that we see in the society, and how do we create a documentary and create awareness that is so much more better, right? So we're not going to be the same with opening government. Opening government basically talks about a bad portrayal of orphan life. Meanwhile, opening opposition is unwilling to take the bullet by saying that, you're going to have a very realistic case. You're going to see that it's okay to not be okay, but at the same time, you're going to be resilient. I mean, the motion literally asks you to defend a romanticization, so you have to defend that. And since they still cannot take that burden, we still think that they haven't won this debate, right? But okay, let's take them at their very best case scenario. That it is possible for you to have resiliency and at the same time know that it is okay for you to not be strong. First of all, where do you draw the line? How do you expect kids to know when is it time to not be okay and when is it time to be resilient? I think that we think that what opening government told you is also very unrealistic, and also will not manifest itself on the reality, right? Because your individual's life are most likely going to be determined by your surrounding instead of pop culture. I mean, when you see Harry Potter, you're not going to, I want to be Harry Potter because I'm an orphan. I'm going to trust people and be kidnapped and got stolen into a van and so on and so forth. Right? That is not the case. You still have teachers who are rational beings. You still have other family, for example, or if you're living in orphanage house, you're still going to have people who take care of you. So at the very best, the impact of this motion is very, very marginal, and that is why we shouldn't even debate about that. What we should debate on how do they create these types of story, and why is this a problematic showcase in an art movie, right? So what is a romanticization actually? I think it usually have two key features. One, it shows an unusual showing of grit and good characters, right? For example, yeah, Naruto is very gritty, and Harry Potter is very smart and very lucky, and it is all thanks because they are an orphan. Because since they are an orphans, they have undergone a lot of hardships, and this is why they are very good, and they become the best kid on that movie, right? Secondly, is unusual showing of support system. You suddenly have all of these friends all around you, right? But the problem here is you tying it all to one quality, right? The orphan status. Why is this problematic? Because this has the chosen one trophy, right? This dismiss other parts of life. And we think that this is very different with opening government told you. What opening government told you is they want a portrayal where you have a multi-dimensional portrayal of what a person is. But I think that what we're going to tell you is not. We regret the romanticization, and we're going to be contradictory to that. We want to show people how bad it is to be an orphan. We want to show you all the suicide cases. We want to show you all the antidepressant that you have to take if you are an orphan and you are living in a very shitty condition. I think this is what people needs to see, not the romanticization, but the darkest part of being an orphan, about how bad your life could be if you are an orphan, how shitty your life could be if you do not have a mother who always stands to, how emotional turbulent you can be, what are all of the possible bad negative impacts that you can possibly have when you are an orphan. Now, why is this the case? Isn't society already have enough bad stigma about orphans? Why do you want this at all, right? Because we think that right now is the momentum, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, we are living in an SJW moment, right? We are living in a mental awareness moment. True, this case might be bad if you talk about it 10 years ago, but now it is very different. Right now, we are seeing more and more people actually wanting to help those who are the most vulnerable. And this is why we want to show them that orphans are the one who are the most vulnerable, and we want to show them all of the bad negative impacts that you can possibly get when you have become an orphan, right? And we think that it is fine if we are stigmatized by this, because we already have stigma anyway, right? All the Japanese people already think bibit bobot bebet, exactly what opening opposition told you, and it is still going on right now. I mean, I broke up with two of my boyfriend because they think I'm a broken home person and I'm dumb and basically not good enough for their son. All of the stigma already exists, but the problem is people do not care about it enough, because we are talking about other part of vulnerable society. I'm not saying that other people are not as vulnerable as orphanage or as orphan people, but the orphans do not get enough attention right now because they think it is a normal part of society, because they think they can help themselves. Exactly what they told you, right? Exactly all of the documentaries that shows all the good sides of them, of these people, right? Of these people, all of the characters, the movie that kids have. People do not care about this, and the marginal impact that it have to individuals are very small anyway. This is why we want to shock people up to the core about how bad it is that you can be, right? True, maybe at the very worst case scenario, true, maybe this could depress more no, it's already 6, depress the individuals even more. All right, we agree to that, and we are willing to take that ballot. Why? Because at the very least, we are going to encourage more structural progresses to have, right? Look, we have all of the organization, we have all the fundings, but the question is, how do we make the fund us, right? We think what will happen outside of the house are, one, the increasing mental awareness that will be specifically targeted to more orphans. That means there will be more researchers, there will be more groups that specifically target orphans, that specific research on all the mental harm and mental impacts that these orphans can have. And this is why we think that you can have more specific target students. Secondly, we also think there might be more scholarships or more help in schools, like counselings, like teachers paying more special attention to orphans, because they knew exactly all the bad harms that these people have. Look, our difference with all the other teams is we are talking about real impacts, not just speculating about how people will feel about this movie. What we talk is structural changes that none of the team in this debate talked to. So proud to propose this debate.
Thank you for your speech. We call up a number of oppositions.
Check, am I audible?
Can you speak louder?
Check, am I audible now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Wait a second. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A couple of reasons why you need to discharge the whole opening debate, right? First, we need to discharge OG because they misunderstand totally about how this romanticization looks. They say that people will see this character as weak and petty. I think that's not true because romanticization means you depict things more idealistic as possible. So exactly, you will put these orphans will be portrayed as resilient and also less vulnerable, that they can keep up with all of the tortures that their foster parents had done to them. They can keep up with the loneliness and stuff. Right? So knowing that their case actually, the basis of their whole case is based on these premises, I think their whole case is already invalid. But second of all, I think that you also need to discharge the debate about how ideally media should be coming from opening opposition, because it's like talking about should it be less lazy or it's okay to be imperfect only creates deadlock, right? Because media is various and like directors and stuff like that are already that various. You cannot force them to opt into these things. I think that you need to extend this to how people will react, because that's the moral purpose of media, to say narrative, to influence people. So talking about the technicalities about how media should operate is not important, because like why this narrative exists. Exactly, that's why narrator exists, to give explicit moral stories in every like storybooks or like kids movies, for example, or how the plot is always be directed to show some moral lessons. So of course, what's more important is about how people perceive this, regardless of like how the directors actually like how they write this, for example. But a couple of rebuttals before going to my substantive. First, talking about OG's case, talking that it's unjust to capitalize on suffering. I think that under that logic, you do not want to make any movies about orphans at all, even if the depiction is realistic, right? Because you will get revenue and also exposure, regardless of how realistic it can be, because like you still capitalize on the suffering under that logic, right? So this argument is a backstep anyway. But second of all, like talking about CG's claim about we're going to show gloomy sides of orphanage, so there will be more research on mental health and stuff. I think that first documentary already exists in Talakua, and that's a whole separate part of popular media. Like we don't understand when we need to include this in popular media, whose like main purpose is to create entertainment. I think that this is not exclusive to begin with, right? But second of all, I think that researchers already do like some mental health counseling and stuff for the purpose of social policies like kids protections and stuff like that, right? So I don't think like it's likely in their side that all of these benefits will be exclusive. But third of all, right? Who will watch this kind of like gloomy movies, right? Because values about orphans' hardship should be shown to kids and adolescents, because like they've already suffered since early stage of life, and exactly they need this media, they need this escapism and so on and so forth. And exactly, right, if these kids see like super gloomy sides of these orphan movies, who will watch? Like they will just cry and will not watch these movies later in the end. So there will be no awareness in your side of the house. So going to my first extension, why don't we create better counter narrative towards the discrimination of orphans? I think the stigma on orphans in status quo is that first, they're mentally and emotionally problematic. They'll always be like fighting with their foster parents. They have mental they have like mental instability and so on. But second of all, they're also perceived as not worth of investing. Like, what's the point of educating these people, because they have no future anywhere, right? That's the stigma circulating inside of conservative people. But how do we counter this, right? First, we counter this by educating the children peers, that is to say like the non-orphan kids that becomes the peer of the orphans, that is to say they're like their kindergarten friends, like their friends in school and stuff. When they consume these romanticizing stories in their storybooks or like in the movies they watch, they're making princesses as the role model. They see that moral values of these orphans, that they deserve respect. Just because they don't have parents, that you have no, just because these peers have no like complete parents, doesn't mean you have right to mock them. Exactly, these children that have complete parents be more willing to interact and play with these orphans, like become more sympathetic and also empathetical for these kids in real life. At least they want to talk. They're not going to seclude or marginalize these kids or bully them, right? Exactly. Under this benefit, these orphans will feel much less lonely and feel much more accepted in their social life. But second of all, we are also counter this from changing the perception of adults. First, they will learn that orphans are also a resilient individual that has hopes for future, that they can do great things too, like Harry Potter, even though they are facing hardships. Means that foster parents or like upper class people much more willing to invest for these kids' future, either like adopt, like adopting them, or maybe like donating for charities that help them, things like that. But second of all, I think that this also affirms that orphans aren't inherently no, thank you. It affirms that orphans aren't inherently violent and angry brats, but there's also a good in their sort of, there's a good thing inside of their hearts, right? That is not being like, maybe that's probably hidden because of the hardships or something like that. At least this kind of perception is shown by Cinderella and also Harry Potter, that depicts that even though they're orphan, they still have like some hard work. They can still be patient with all of these hardships. They can still be kind and also like loving towards others. Exactly because popular media is that influential, this narrative can entrench that. OO brought this a bit, but never did they explain the step-by-step process and how then these kids will get help. We actually explain you how then the help for these individuals will increase, because exactly orphans are lonely. We need surrounding people to help them. They cannot just self-sustain. But second extension then, why the worst case we have false hope is perfectly fine. Let's compare with government side. When they have realistic portrayal, first, when it's going to be gloomy and all, no children will watch it. Nobody will want to hear your moral value because it's not entertaining. Probably only adults will want to watch this so-called documentary video. So you cannot change their mindset, right? Because they're like, it's hard for you to change the mindset. To like just suddenly, showing this to adults and then just like expect them to change all of a sudden, which orphan children want to watch. What kind of orphan children wants to watch sad, creepy stories? They will just cry and don't want to watch movies again. But second of all, I think that kids who watch this will only, no, it's already 6. Like, orphan kids who watch this will only be reminded about the real harsh life continuously. I think that media should be a sense of escapism, right? Means that you should not remind people about the cruel reality. Escapism is a place where they can be happy, where things are perfect. In our set, as kids, you will be much more excited to watch these stories. And that there are some like 2 or 3 hours where you can relieve all your burden. It refreshes you. At least you can escape the loneliness for a while, because they will internalize this as they grow. At least this kind of a story can be like small sense of happiness that help them to go through the day. They can see Rapunzel and also Cinderella as their role model. At least there's a little sense of escapism there. We're very proud to oppose.
It was the case of government call upon government whip.
Wait a second. Let me. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. I think when you talk about kids, it's always a hit or miss. I mean, if you watch Naruto, do you really the most thing that you remember about Naruto is him being an orphan, getting out struggle of being an orphan? Not really. It's all about ninjutsu, right? It's about the fight with Sasuke. It's about all the World War of the ninja and so whatsoever. Or when you talk about like Harry Potter, what you do with your friends is necessarily saying Wingardium Leviosa and something flies off something, right? So necessarily this is not the focus when you watch these pop cultures, especially when you're talking about kids. So when the importance of them saying that we have to target kids or whatsoever, it's not really that matter, right? Because kids doesn't focus on those things. Kids doesn't focus on the very heavy part of their life. Not really. It's adults who actually discuss them. It's exactly when we talk about movies like Parasite, for instance, or we talk about movies like Rocketman or Moonlight that talk about LGBTQIA, for instance. They discuss this. Exactly, adults are people that we have to target in this debate, because they are the people who can create structural changes. Exactly why closing governments takes this debate. What is the attack coming from the opposition bench, right? They tell you a very technical issue, talking about, this is not a pop culture, but necessarily there's so many things that currently are pop culture and still realistics and portraying the worst part of their life. Exactly, ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about Rocketman, we talk about Moonlight, for instance. We think that if this was very technical, they have to engage the whole of our case on why then you cannot target adults. Exactly, we bite the bullet. Yes, we are going to target adults, and that is what's important in this debate, right? With that said, I'm going to talk about two things in my speech. First, I'm going to talk about what should the portrayal of orphans look like, and secondly, how is it going to help the orphans. First, I'm going to talk about what should the portrayal of orphans look like. All the teams here talking about the portrayal of orphans should, be engaged towards towards the orphan themselves. How currently OG saying that they are extreme, for instance, they're in need of love. What they want necessarily is a multi-dimensional figure of the orphan themselves, right? But the question is debate is what then it should be, right? We don't necessarily think it should be multi-dimensional like how OG wanted to bring to you. The stance of closing governments tell you that the protest should be real struggle, because the problem in here that people that we have to cater to are not the orphans but the society. Because when you talk about the society, all the pressure that opening opposition talk about how they don't care, how your in-laws is going to say to you like bad things about you or whatsoever. Exactly, if the society, not the orphan, ladies and gentlemen, the one that is a problematic is not people who are currently oppressed, being oppressed, ladies and gentlemen, but people who are oppressive. Exactly why the moment we target the society, exactly that's the moment where they can create a structural changes. Because when you talk about orphan, for instance, orphans have different opinions. For instance, orphans have there are literally many different orphans. For instance, they are also like people like us. They don't come into one box and then you can generalize them and say they all gonna love these movies anyway, right? That's why exactly when you portray the worst of them and create society, exactly how then this should be the portrayal of orphan. This is why the explanation coming from Audrina is very important in this debate, because we think that is what should be the tipping point in this debate, right? So let's move on to the second issue, right? On how this is going to help orphans. What did opening opposition tell you? Then let's tell you that currently you're going to be portrayed as the most important characters, and secondly, you say that you're going to show that you have struggle and you're going to be resilient in that, right? First response to this that it is inexclusive in nature. I mean, when you talk about you're going to be the most important character, that's literally every movie about orphans. It doesn't necessarily have to be romanticized, right? So necessarily that their case is so inexclusive in the end of the day, right? But secondly, right? But secondly, right, we think when you talk about orphan, the question then, when you watch Naruto or when you watch Harry Potter, for instance, you're going to be shown that your identity as an orphan is going to be shown. We think that your identity is very small the moment it's going to be romanticized, because it's rarely come out, for instance. When you see Naruto, for instance, most likely you see Ninjutsu, for instance. So when does you see his identity as an orphan? That's the moment where he's only alone, for instance. But most of the time, in the whole series, I kid you not, there is little to no time where he is alone, where he is depressed, ladies and gentlemen. So his identity and his struggle as an orphan is shown very little in these types of portrayal. Or when you talk about Harry Potter, for instance, when does you see him being an orphan shown? It's necessarily when he touches his forehead and suddenly, my parents died or whatsoever, right? So necessarily they don't know on the kind of things that currently happens. We don't think it's going to be accurate to their struggles anyway, right? But even in their best case, let's compare to my Audrina's case, right? We think exactly we don't target the orphans themselves, because it necessarily is going to be hit or miss. We think that the deputy leader of oppositions agree with this when they say that it's going to be overgeneralizing them, and that's okay as long as we get attentions or whatsoever. Exactly why it's going to be hit or miss, because you overgeneralize these kind of orphan. At the end of the day, you cannot necessarily say you're going to persuade them and make them resilient even in your best case, right? On our side of the house, what we tell you is we show the pressing and real struggles towards these people. This is how we're going to change structurally. Because when we talk about pop culture, discussion is hip right now. Exactly, we talk about Parasite. Exactly, we talk about Green Book. Exactly, we talk about Moonlight. These kind of discussion happens because there is pop culture. This is how we're going to change it structurally. Because the moment it's popular, the moment all these depressing stories, the moment all these real struggles came into the light, that's the moment where schools can be built, where philanthropy exactly came in, because they see this as something that is lucrative. For instance, they know that currently, all these SJO, for instance, most likely all these SJO that we currently live in is going to come out and support them in the end of the day. Exactly how we get funding from them and changes it structurally, ladies and gentlemen. But then there's an attack coming from the closing opposition saying that why then it will be interesting? Exactly because we are in a social justice warrior era. Exactly where we care about mental health, for instance, we care about most vulnerable people. So the question is, if you want to help the orphans, how then you portray them as the most vulnerable actor in this debate? Are you going to portray them, by having ninjutsu, for instance, by creating cool things that they have currently? Not necessarily, but in creating showing the real struggles that they have currently, the depressions that they have currently is the most important thing in this debate, right? Lastly, right, what did closing up tell you? They say that it's going to be escapisms and necessarily this good for the kids. We don't think so, right? We don't think kids currently can escape this kind of thing, even if they watch pop culture, ladies and gentlemen. Reality will hit them eventually. What does it mean? It means that, their friends in middle schools will still tell them that they don't have, father or mother, even though they watch Naruto, for instance. Kids who are insensitive will continue to be insensitive because they don't necessarily understand all these films, all these complications, ladies and gentlemen. So what does it mean? It means that we have to change the structure, ladies and gentlemen. We are fine with kids who are currently maybe depressed by all these documentaries because in the end of the day, the delta or the difference or people who are currently depressed is necessarily very small. It means that the one, structural changes is the most important thing in this debate, and secondly, people will always be depressed anyway. We think that we need help to them, not just some wishy-washy. They're going to be resilient in the end of the day. Very proud to propose this.
Thank you for the speech. We call upon opposition whip.
Clarifications that I would like to bring, right? First, I think you should kick opening government out because they told you that, because it's funny because they want to still maintain representation for orphans, yet they do not want to emphasize on hope, emphasize on realistic incident, right? We question then how in your side of the house the orphans can relate to the stories, right? How then other people who might have helped them can also relate to the struggle of the orphans themselves, right? Because success and social benefits in their side of the house are going to be too damn high of a dream, exactly because they've been normalized since the very first place that they will always fail no matter what kind of thresholds that you're putting into their face, right? This is why too realistic characterizations might create a portrayal of impossibility to these orphans, right? But opening opposition, on the other hand, did a good job about explaining the internalization process of hope, right? However, since all benches agree that life is indeed shitty for these orphans, that orphans are facing structural problems and nasty generalization from the people, we said that there should be a discussion why then orphan should be helping the problems or solving the problems by themselves, right? We said that this is where romanticization actually gives counter narrative for people or for the people surrounding these orphans, so that at least they're willing to help, at least trust the orphans, that they're worth it to be given second chances. This is where closing opposition will extend the benefit, right? I have only one issue in this debate, right? Why then this will be bad for orphans, right? Because the main bulk of argumentation coming from closing government is that they want to portray these the darkest part of the stories of the orphans, so therefore people can relate to it and people will help, right? I don't think that this is going to be relatable and so on and so forth, right? We think that on the contrary, it's going to be very dangerous. There are two scenarios. First, for the orphans themselves, it will diminish all of their hope that there's not going to be any light at the end of the tunnel. But I'm not going to dive into this kind of issue because OO has already explained. But second scenario, and the most important thing, is that it's going to diminish hope of the people surrounding these orphans, right? This will directly tackle clash with the issue of hope and also help from closing government, right? Because people will not having support or give empathy to these orphans, because people's way of rationalizing the extreme sad stories is by seeing it as a desperate or dire conditions. That means the orphans are lost causes, because it's too damn hurtful, because it's too damn sad that it has become a issue that is beyond reparation for any person to be able to repair, right? This means that orphans in their side of the house will always be portrayed that these orphans will always be suicidal, these people will always harm themselves, these people will always self-doubting, and so on and so forth, right? This is why in parallel real issues like cancer or other terminal illnesses, people are so desperate that they turn their emotion off and start to find a way of rationalizing things that maybe it's just it's just best to let them go, right? This is why in the 1965 communist purge of like trying to restore or trying to find justice, for example, because the stories coming from the documentaries are too sad and too bad, people are starting to habituate themselves to actually let go of this problem because there's no chance of achieving positive outcome, right? This is also being complemented by the nasty comment that orphans are just illegitimate child, meaning that they will be tormented eternally and they will not having any good fate in whatsoever, meaning that their fate is inherently sealed the moment they were born, right? Exactly why the kind of mechanism coming from closing government, which is to provide documentary, will be bad because it's only going to be one-sided and too serious, right? It's like in your face kind of a thing to these people who are actually willing to help the orphans, right? It limits the possibilities of outcomes because it's based on one specific real issue. This is why stories are going to be less dynamic in Ours of the House, thus less showing the positive side of these orphans, right? This is the contribution coming from my member. This is why we need romanticization. That even if Cinderella is being doomed to eternity by being with evil stepsisters and stepmother, she's still thriving and be very cheerful, right? Or Harry Potter, instead of avenging his parents' death and becoming very emotional, he still shows compassion to Draco Malfoy, right? Even though he come from the Malfoy family who was also contributing to the death of his parents, right? This gives counter narrative that orphans are not indeed lost causes, exactly because you portray them on the contrary side, right? How then this will translate into real life? This will translate into, for example, better management in orphan houses, exactly because these kids' fates are not sealed yet, and it depends on the people's collective efforts to guide the children into a good pathway, right? This is in the case of Harry Potter, for example, where Dumbledore sacrifices and the value of true friendship being given by Hermione and Ron guide him to shed away anger and revenge and instill the view of love and also opportunity, right? This is likely because government and people like to invest on person or issues that have possibility of succeeding, right? Because they do not want their investment to be a lost cause. Why then this point is important, right? Why then the point of my member about incentivizing people to help these orphans is important? Because exactly, right? They've been alone for so long that they need at least companionship. Unlike OO that has become too extreme in explaining that these orphans can stand on their own, companionship provides these orphans with better and newer perspective, right? This will look like people giving chances of orphans getting getting employment, for example, because they see these orphans as not lost causes and they deserve second chances because they're able to recompense all of the emotion, all of their explosive turmoil that they have in their self, right? Exactly why we need to target the adults like what they said, right? Because exactly they're the ones who have the resources and capability to actually help these orphans to get out from the cycle of torment, of torture, and also poverty, right? But even if we're also going to still target kids in closing opposition, we still think it's quite possible, right? The very fact that they still show emotions such as crying or like laughter or joy means that values of friendships and also values of death are universal, that are easily digestible for the kids, right? Meaning that wars and also like ninjutsu stories plot are just means or it's already 7 to get through understanding the stories, right? But exactly this is matter because at least from the very beginning, we've habituated these children to see that, look, if you have an orphan friend, you should comfort him exactly because that's the moment when he will succeed, just like Naruto. This is why I'm so proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the debate. Please just wait in this breakout room. Also, the panels, we can go to Discord. Thank you.